The Texas sun bled into the horizon like a wound that would never heal, smearing crimson light across miles of mesquite and dust. Heat shimmered off the plains even as evening crept in, and the smell of dry sage mixed with distant smoke. Travelers along the frontier still spoke of Elias Kane as though he were a myth, a deputy who rode without a partner, who spoke little and never smiled, a man whose presence carried the stillness of a drawn gun. Tonight, that legend rode a black gelding named Flint, the horse's hooves drumming a steady rhythm on the hardpan earth as if answering some secret call. Kane's eyes, gray as a thunderhead, narrowed when the wind shifted and brought the scent of iron and fire. He slowed Flint to a walk, listening. Beyond the low whistle of a prairie breeze came a sound like a raven's cry, sharp, brief, and wrong. He dismounted, crouching low to the ground where shadows lengthened like black rivers. The tracks were easy to read for a man who had spent years in untamed country. Deep ruts of a heavy coach, hoofprints from 6, maybe 7 horses, and scattered boot marks where riders had dismounted. Dusty leaves of mesquite brushed his sleeve as he followed the trail west. The first body appeared where the land dipped into a dry arroyo. A young man lay face down beside a shattered wheel, shirt dark with blood. The stagecoach itself rested on its side a few yards away, one door hanging like a broken wing. Kane approached with silent care, hand on the worn grip of his Colt. The dying sun caught something bright on the man's chest, a badge, a star dulled by blood. Kane turned him over gently. A U.S. Marshal, breathing in ragged gasps. The Marshal's eyes fluttered open, clouded and unfocused. Black vultures, he rasped, voice cracked like old leather. Came out of nowhere, took the strongbox, headed south, leader, a coughing fit choked the words. Kane reached for his canteen, but the Marshal pushed it aside. Don't waste it. Stop them, before they cross the canyon. His hand tightened once on Kane's wrist, then went slack. Kane closed the Marshal's eyes and pulled a dusty blanket from the overturned coach, laying it over the body. He counted 3 more victims, 2 passengers and the driver, all dead where they'd fallen. Bullet holes in the wood told the rest of the story, a swift ambush, precise and merciless. The Black Vulture gang had struck again. Their name carried weight along the Rio Grande, whispered in saloons and rail depots. They were butchers and ghosts both, leaving no survivors when it suited them. Flint stamped the ground, sensing Kane's rising tension. He scanned the fading light, noting the faint trail of hoofprints veering toward the south. He had no illusions about the risk. The nearest cavalry post lay 2 days right east. By then the gang would vanish into the borderlands where no badge held sway. The law here was the speed of your draw and the strength of your resolve. He wiped a streak of blood from his thumb onto the dirt, a silent oath. Not this time, he murmured. Kane swung into the saddle as the first stars pricked the darkening sky. The desert night sharpened every sound, the whisper of the wind, the rattle of a lone cottonwood, the distant chorus of coyotes rising like mourners. He leaned low, urging Flint forward. The gelding surged into a ground-eating lope, hoofs striking sparks on scattered stone. The trail led through rolling prairie broken by jagged outcroppings of red rock. The moon climbed, a pale sentinel casting silver over the land. Kane's mind slipped into the quiet calculation of a hunter. The Black Vultures were clever but careless with arrogance. He spotted signs others might miss, a snapped twig where a rider brushed too close, the faint stink of cheap tobacco. Each clue tightened the invisible noose he meant to lay around them. Hours passed. Dust coated his coat and face, but he welcomed the grit. It anchored him to purpose, kept old memories from rising. War memories, fields of smoke and thunder, the echo of comrades' last breaths. He had left those ghosts behind when he pinned the deputy's star to his chest, but nights like this called them back. He remembered the weight of a long rifle, the stillness before a shot. He had been a different man then, younger, but the instincts never left. A sudden gust carried a smell of rain and something fouler, burned coffee, maybe, or scorched mesquite. Kane slowed, dismounted, and crouched beside a cluster of stones. A small fire had been hastily stamped out not long ago. Still warm ashes confirmed the gang was only a few hours ahead. He allowed himself no rest. The sky deepened to ink as he rode on, moonlight painting the landscape in shades of bone. Bats wheeled overhead like silent scouts. Far to the west, lightning stitched the clouds, promising a storm that could wipe away tracks. He urged Flint faster, feeling the horse's muscles bunch and release beneath him like coiled springs. Past midnight, he entered a narrow pass where cliffs loomed like sleeping giants. Here the air changed, heavy with the promise of rain and something else, a quiet that was not natural. Cain reined in and listened. Somewhere high above, a stone clattered against rock, too deliberate for chance. His hand went to his Colt. A shadow moved along the ridge, then another. He held his breath. 2 men, silhouettes barely darker than the night, watching the trail. Scouts, or perhaps sentries left behind. Cain slipped from the saddle and led Flint into a shallow ravine, muffling the geldings bit with a rag. He crouched behind a boulder, eyes trained on the ridge. The men lingered only a minute before melding into the dark. Perhaps they were checking for pursuit, or perhaps the gang expected no one brave, or foolish, enough to follow. Either way, they confirmed he was close. Rain began as a thin drizzle, tapping his hat brim, turning dust to mud. Cain pulled his coat tighter, patient as stone. He would not reveal himself, not yet. This was a chase, not a charge. He waited until the patter of rain softened the trail to a blur, then mounted and pushed on. By dawn, the prairie stretched before him in ghostly mist. He paused at a ridge to watch the sky bleed from purple to copper. In the distance a hawk circled, its cry sharp against the hush of morning. Cain took it as a sign. The black vultures were near, and the hunt had only begun. The day grew hot quickly. The sun burned away the mist, revealing the stark beauty of the land, cactus spines glittering with dew, red canyons yawning like open wounds. Cain's shadow stretched long across the ground, a solitary raider chasing justice into the wild. He thought of the marshal's last grip on his wrist, of the lifeless passengers whose journey ended in that lonely arroyo. Their silence rode with him, urging him forward. Toward midday he found another clue, a single silver button crushed into the dirt, scuffed by a boot heel. He pocketed it without a word, eyes scanning the horizon where distant mesas shimmered in heat haze. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest echo of laughter, or maybe it was only the rustle of dry grass. Either way, his jaw tightened. The black vultures were out there, somewhere beyond the shimmering air, believing themselves untouchable. Cain touched the brim of his hat against the sun, narrowed his eyes, and spurred Flint into a gallop. The blood trail stretched on, but so did his resolve. Somewhere ahead the gang rode hard, but he would ride harder. Justice, in a land where law was only as strong as the men who upheld it, would not wait for cavalry or courts. It rode in the heart of a lone deputy who had already seen too much death to turn back. The sun climbed mercilessly over the high desert, bleaching the world into a canvas of white fire and shadow. Elias Cain leaned low in the saddle, the brim of his hat casting a thin line of shade across eyes that burned from grit and sleeplessness. Flint's black coat shimmered with sweat, each breath a labored puff of steam in the heat. The trail before them stretched as fragile as a ghost, faint hoofprints etched into hardened earth, sometimes disappearing altogether where wind had scoured the sand clean. But Cain read signed the way other men read scripture. A shard of green glass half buried near a dry mesquite, the acrid scent of spilled whiskey carried on a breeze, the glint of a horseshoe nail. Each clue whispered that the Black Vulture gang had passed this way, confident in their head start. By midday the air wavered in molten ripples. His canteen felt lighter than memory, and when he tilted it the water barely wet his tongue. He pressed on, muscles aching, ears tuned to every sound that did not belong to the natural rhythm of the frontier. A sudden cough of wind revealed a lonely homestead crouched in a shallow basin ahead, its roof a sagging patchwork of tin and wood. Smoke curled weakly from a chimney as though the fire inside had lost its will. Cain dismounted and approached with measured steps. A woman emerged from the doorway clutching a battered rifle, her eyes wide beneath a sun-faded bonnet. Her face bore the weather of 100 storms, but fear etched sharper lines than any wind. "I got nothing worth taking," she said, voice trembling despite the weapon's steady aim. "I'm not here for goods," Cain replied, his own voice low and calm. "I'm hunting men who came through this way. Black vultures." Her breath caught, the rifle lowered an inch. "They rode past near dawn," she whispered. 7 of them, maybe more. Stopped for water at the well, laughed like devils. One of them tossed a match into my henhouse for sport. I put it out, but her eyes flicked toward a charred corner of the yard where smoke still clung to blackened wood. "They said they'd get the next soul who followed." Cain studied the tracks in the dust, heavy, recent. "Did they say where?" "They just said south," she answered, voice breaking. "South, to the canyons. And they said the law don't ride that far." "The law rides where it must," Cain said quietly. He tipped his hat in solemn thanks and returned to Flint. As he mounted, the woman called after him, "Mister, you be careful." Those men ain't men anymore. The words followed him like an echo long after the homestead shrank to a speck against the horizon. He knew she was right in a way. The black vultures had crossed a line most men only approached in nightmares. Their cruelty was deliberate, theatrical. He wondered how far a man could ride in darkness before the darkness became him. By late afternoon the trail wound into badlands where crimson spires rose from the earth like the bones of some ancient beast. Shadows sharpened in the lowering sun, painting the landscape in layers of rust and gold. Cain dismounted to examine a new sign, a torn scrap of cloth snagged on a thorn, stained with sweat and blood. Nearby lay a bottle of cheap whiskey, its neck broken clean. He lifted it to his nose, still pungent, still wet. They were close, maybe a few hours ahead. A sudden rustle drew his gaze to a cluster of sage. A man stepped out, staggering. His bare chest gleamed with sweat, dark hair matted to his forehead. An arrow shaft jutted from his side, the wound clotted but angry. Cain's hand hovered near his gun until he recognized the faint tattoos across the man's arms, marks of a Comanche scout. The stranger sank to one knee, eyes sharp despite pain. Cain knelt beside him. "You need a doctor." The scout shook his head, blood on his teeth when he spoke. "Too late for that." His English was rough but clear. "I followed black carrion birds. They hunt more than gold." "The black vultures." The scout's gaze pierced the fading light. "The vulture waits for the dying sun," he said, each word deliberate. "They ride to the red canyons where night comes first. You follow death." Cain offered his canteen, but the men pushed it back. "I hear. But you," he gripped Cain's wrist with surprising strength. "Do not stop. End them." Then his eyes rolled white, and he sagged forward, breath gone. For a moment the world hushed. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Cain lowered the men gently to the ground and stood. The dying sun bled across the horizon, exactly as the scout had warned. He felt the words settle into his bones like a prophecy. The vulture waits for the dying sun. Twilight fell like a curtain as he rode into the maze of canyons. The air cooled sharply, a sudden winter after the day's furnace. Shadows pooled in every crease of the red rock, and the sound of Flint's hooves echoed like distant gunfire. Here the frontier felt alive, as if the stone itself watched and judged. The canyon walls glowed in the last light, striations of ochre and vermilion catching the moon's first silver touch. Memories came unbidden, drawn by the quiet. He saw his partner Ben Whitlock's grin, wide as a summer sky, the day they pinned on their badges together. He heard the gunshot again, the one that took Ben's life during a bank robbery 3 years past. Cain had been seconds too slow, a single heartbeat that would never stop echoing. The guilt had not dulled with time. It rode beside him, whispering in every silence. He had sworn after Ben's death that he would never hesitate again, never fail a man who needed him. The canyon narrowed, forcing a slow descent. Cain dismounted, leading Flint by the reins along a dry riverbed littered with pale stones. Moonlight silvered the rock spires above, turning them into silent sentinels. The air smelled of mineral and shadow. A lone owl hooted, its cry long and hollow, carrying across the labyrinth of stone. He found more signs, a smoldering fire pit hidden beneath an overhang, fresh horse droppings still warm to the touch. The black vultures were bedding down somewhere in this maze, believing the night and the cliffs would shield them. Cain crouched, fingers brushing the ashes, and felt the faintest residual heat. He was close enough now to hear the faint jingle of a bridle if the wind favored him. He studied the stars, charting direction the way old scouts had taught him. South and west the canyon twisted toward the border, where law ended and chaos began. But he sensed they had paused, perhaps to rest their mounts or divide their loot. Their arrogance would be their weakness. A gust of cold wind funneled through the rocks, carrying with it a sound that tightened every muscle in his body. Faint laughter, harsh and cruel, riding the currents like a dark hymn. Cain stilled, heart-thudding. The black vultures were near, and they were unaware of the lone shadow moving through their night. He crouched lower, every sense sharpened. The moon climbed higher, bathing the crimson cliffs in pale fire. He felt the desert's ancient weight pressing down, the land itself holding its breath for what came next. Somewhere ahead lay the gang, drunk on stolen whiskey and their own invincibility. Somewhere ahead waited justice, swift, silent, and unyielding. Cain touched the brim of his hat, a silent salute to the dead marshal, to the frightened homesteader, to the fallen Comanche scout whose warning had guided him. Then he pressed on, a single figure moving through the labyrinthine canyons as the night deepened, the promise of reckoning echoing with every quiet step. The night had thinned to a gray hush when the faint glow of a lantern wavered against the horizon. Elias Kane reined Flint to a cautious walk, senses sharpened by hours of pursuit through the maze of canyons. The scent of mesquite smoke drifted on the cold air, warm and earthy against the mineral tang of stone. He followed the glow until it resolved into the outline of a lonely ranch house crouched beneath a stand of wind-gnarled cottonwoods, its wooden walls bleached silver by moonlight. A rifle's click broke the silence. "One more step and you'll eat lead," a woman's voice called, low and steady. Kane halted, lifting both hands slightly. "Evening, ma'am," he said. "I'm not here to steal or harm. Just looking for water and a place to rest my horse." The lantern light shifted, revealing a figure on the porch. She was tall and lean, framed by the door like a sentinel. The rifle never wavered. A wide brim had shadowed her face, but the glint of her eyes was sharp as broken glass. "No travelers come this way by accident," she said. "State your name and your purpose." "Deputy Elias Kane," he answered. "I'm on the trail of the Black Vulture gang. They've been through these canyons." At the mention of the name, something tightened in her stance. She stepped closer, the lantern lifting to catch her features. Wind-roughened skin, a thin scar along her jaw, hair the color of dark honey drawn back in a practical knot. Grief lived behind her gaze, but it had hardened into something like steel. "My husband crossed paths with those devils 2 years back," she said. "They left him in the dirt with 3 bullets in his chest. Name's Clara Boone." Kane studied her for a heartbeat, recognizing the quiet fury beneath her measured words. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Sorry doesn't bring him back," she replied, but her rifle lowered a fraction. "Tie your horse at the post. You can water him at the trough. But don't think for a second I trust you." Inside, the ranch house smelled of wood smoke and strong coffee. The walls bore the marks of a life both solitary and hard, racks of tools, a shelf of worn books, a quilt patched with careful hands. Clara moved with a controlled precision, setting the lantern on a scarred table before pouring 2 mugs from a blackened pot. She slid one toward him but did not sit. Kane removed his hat and accepted the coffee. "You live out here alone?" "Since they killed Matthew," she said, her voice flat. "Neighbors offered to take me in. I told them this land was ours, and I'd be damned before I let those vultures chase me off too." The bitterness in her tone carried more resolve than despair. Kane recognized it, the same stubborn fire that kept him riding long after others would have turned back. "You keep a fine rifle," he said, nodding toward the Winchester leaning against the doorframe. "I keep more than one," she replied. "A woman learns fast when she's the only law for miles." Outside, the wind rose, rattling the cottonwoods like dry bones. Kane explained the trail he'd followed, the bodies left in the arroyo, the Comanche scouts' dying warning. Clara listened without interrupting, her eyes narrowing at the mention of Dead Horse Canyon. When he finished, she set her mug down with a quiet finality. "They were here," she said. "Not today, but last night. I heard horses on the ridge and stayed inside with the lamps out. Thought maybe I imagined it, but I don't imagine boot prints around my welcome morning." Kane felt the old hunter's instinct quicken. "How far is Dead Horse from here?" "Half a day's ride if you know the shortcuts," she said. "It's a tangle of stone and dry riverbeds, easy to hide in. If they mean to cross the border at dawn, they'll rest there before making the push." Silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Clara's gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "You plan to take them alone?" "That's the plan," Kane answered. "It's a fool plan," she said, though her voice held no mockery. "But maybe the only kind that works." She moved to the hearth and stirred the mesquite fire, sparks rising like tiny red spirits. "I can guide you through the back trails," she said vinily. "I know every twist of those canyons. And I can shoot straighter than most men you'll meet." Kane studied her profile in the firelight, the hard line of her jaw, the flicker of pain behind her determination. "It's dangerous," he said. "I stopped fearing danger the night they left Matthew bleeding in the dust," she replied. "Besides, someone ought to make them pay." They took their vigil outside beneath a sky strewn with stars so bright they seemed carved from ice. The mesquite fire crackled softly as coyotes sang across the open plains. Clara sat opposite him, rifle across her knees, the firelight etching copper highlights into her hair. For a long time neither spoke. The night had its own music, the low hum of wind through cottonwood branches, the distant rush of a hidden creek, the whisper of embers collapsing. When she did speak, her voice carried a weight that matched the darkness around them. Matthew was gentle, she said. Liked to whistle while he worked. Said the frontier wasn't a place for hate, only for starting fresh. When the vultures came, he tried to talk them down. They laughed and shot him where he stood. I buried him under the big mesquite out back. Every morning I say his name so the world remembers. Kane stared into the flames, remembering Ben Whitlock's grin, the easy jokes that once filled long patrols. My partner died because I hesitated, he admitted. One heartbeat too slow, and the bullet found him instead of me. Been trying to pay that debt ever since. Clara met his eyes, the fire reflected there like twin embers. Then we ride for more than justice, she said. We ride for the ones we lost. The fire burned lower as the hours passed. Kane felt an unexpected calm settle over him, a quiet camaraderie forged in shared loss. The land around them seemed to listen, the vast Texas night holding them in a rare and fragile peace. Near dawn, a low rumble stirred the air, a far-off echo that could have been thunder or the distant roll of hooves. Clara stood, scanning the dark rim of the horizon. They're moving, she said, voice sharp with certainty. I know that sound. Horses, heavy with riders. Kane rose, checking the cold at his hip. The eastern sky held the first pale blush of morning, a promise and a warning. Clara slung her rifle over her shoulder with practiced ease. Dead Horse Canyon, she said. If we take the Dry Creek cut, we can beat them to the narrow pass. Flint snorted softly as Kane tightened the cinch. Clara's chestnut mare pawed the ground, eager as its raider. They mounted without another word. As they rode out, the mesquite fire guttered behind them, sending a final plume of sparks into the paling night. The trail ahead was dark and treacherous, a ribbon of silver under a dying moon. Kane felt the weight of the coming clash settle into his bones, but for the first time in days he did not feel alone. Clara rode beside him, eyes fixed on the shadowed canyons where vengeance waited. Together they vanished into the dim glow of dawn, two solitary figures bound by loss and a single, unyielding purpose. Dawn found the canyon shrouded in a pale violet haze, the sandstone cliffs glowing like embers beneath the first sweep of sun. Elias Kane studied the labyrinth of Dead Horse Canyon from a narrow overlook, the chill of night still clinging to the rocks. Below, the crooked trails forked and converged like veins through a giant's heart, perfect ground for a trap if he and Clara played their cards with patience. Flint stood quiet behind him, ears flicking to the distant echo of hooves. The black vultures were near. Clara crouched beside a cluster of thornbush, her eyes keen beneath the brim of her hat. They'll have to pass that split, she whispered, pointing to a narrow choke where boulders funneled the trail into a single-file path. We can use the high ledge for cover. One shot and they'll be boxed in. Kane nodded, the plan forming in silence. They moved with the precision of people who had long ago learned to trust instinct over words. He led Flint behind a jag of stone and looped the reins, then checked his Colt and the rifle slung across his back. Clara eased her Winchester into place, testing the action with a soft click that sounded loud in the stillness. The canyon air smelled of iron and mesquite, damp from a night mist that clung to the rocks. Far off, a hawk screamed, its cry bouncing from wall to wall like a warning. Kane lay flat on the ledge, feeling the stone's cold seep through his coat. Beside him Clara steadied her breathing, eyes fixed on the trail below. They waited. Minutes stretched into an eternity measured by the slow creep of sunlight down the canyon walls. Then came the faint rattle of harness and the muted thud of hooves. Shadows lengthened at the far bend as riders emerged, 7 of them, dark shapes against the rising glare. Their laughter carried upward, harsh and careless. Kane recognized the broad-shouldered leader at once, a black scarf tied across his throat and a silver revolver flashing in the light. He raised 2 fingers. Clara gave a single nod. When the gang reached the choke point, Kane squeezed the trigger. The crack of his rifle shattered the morning, echoing through the canyon like thunder. The lead rider pitched from his saddle before the sound had faded. Horses screamed, rearing in panic. Clara's Winchester barked twice, each shot deadly precise. 2 more men toppled, their weapons clattering on stone. Chaos erupted. The remaining outlaws scrambled for cover, gunfire ricocheting in violent echoes that made it impossible to tell where the next bullet would come from. Dust boiled upward, mixing with acrid smoke until the air stung the eyes. Kane shifted position, firing again, methodical as a clock. Clara's sharp reports answered his, each one measured and sure. A bullet sparked off the rock near Kane's head. He rolled, finding a fresh angle, and caught sight of the leader rallying his men with a bellow. Their eyes met across the chaos, and in that instant recognition flared. The man's expression twisted from rage to something colder, almost disbelief. "Well, I'll be damned," the leader shouted, his voice cutting through the din. "The ghost of Shiloh walks again." The name hit Cain like a physical blow, dragging old ghosts into the daylight. He hadn't heard it in years, since the war, when his skill with a long rifle had earned whispers across battlefields. He had buried that identity with the dead, sworn never to wear it again. But the outlaw's word spread through the gang like wildfire, and suddenly their fear sharpened. "Ghost or men, you'll bleed the same," the leader snarled, firing wildly toward the ridge. Cain's jaw tightened. The past he tried to leave behind now stood in the open like a brand. He steadied his breathing, sighted along the rifle's barrel, and fired. Another outlaw fell, the shot precise despite the storm of noise. Clara, undeterred by the revelation, worked her lever action with deadly rhythm, her face set in grim focus. The gang's bravado crumbled. Two men spurred their horses in a desperate bid for the canyon mouth, only to meet Clara's unerring aim. The others scattered deeper into the maze of stone, leaving their fallen behind. Dust choked the air, and the echoes of gunfire faded into uneasy silence. Cain scanned the trail for the leader, but the moon was gone. A fresh trail of hoofprints led toward a dark fissure at the canyon's far end. He slung the rifle across his back and vaulted from a ledge, landing in a crouch. Clara scrambled down after him, her boots skidding on loose shale. "He's running for the southern cut," she said, eyes blazing. Cain mounted Flint with a single motion. "Stay behind me," he called, and urged the gelding forward. They plunged into the labyrinth, the world narrowing to twisting walls of red stone and the pounding of hooves. Shadows danced like phantoms as sunlight flickered through narrow openings above. Cain leaned low, following the fresh prints through switchbacks and sudden drops. The scent of gunpowder still hung in the cold air. A sharp report echoed off the canyon walls. A bullet screamed past, sparking stone inches from Cain's shoulder. He reined hard, spotting the leader ahead, spearing a bay horse up a steep incline. The outlaw fired again, the shot ringing like a challenge. Cain felt the old war-honed calm settle over him, that strange stillness that came when life and death balanced on a breath. He pressed Flint harder, closing the distance as the trail narrowed to a ledge barely wide enough for a horse. Clara followed, her mare's hooves striking sparks in the dim light. The leader glanced back, eyes wide with something beyond fear. Recognition again, this time of a hunter who would not quit. He shouted a curse and kicked his horse into a reckless climb. The path tilted upward toward a jagged outcrop that opened to the sky. Wind roared through the gap as Cain crested the ridge. The outlaw had dismounted on the far side, taking cover behind a spire of rock. Cain slid from the saddle and moved forward, every step deliberate. Clara held back, rifle ready, reading the same deadly geometry. "You should have stayed dead, Ghost," the leader called, voice raw. "World doesn't need men like you no more." Cain's reply was a quiet steel. "Then why are you the one running?" Silence stretched, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk. The leader stepped from behind the rock, revolver raised, face twisted with rage and something like admiration. "I remember Shiloh," he said. "One shot, one kill. You haunted those fields like a specter. Never thought I'd meet you again." "You just did," Cain said. The outlaw fired first. Cain moved with practiced instinct, the world slowing to the rhythm of his heartbeat. His own shot came a fraction later, echoing like a drumbeat through the canyon. The leader staggered, dropped his revolver, and collapsed against the stone. Cain approached, cold steady. The man's breath came in ragged bursts, eyes locked on Cain's with a strange, almost peaceful clarity. "Guess the stories were true," he whispered, blood staining his scarf. "Ghost of Shiloh, still the fastest draw." Cain said nothing. He watched the life drain from the man's eyes, felt neither triumph nor relief, only the weight of another death added to an old ledger. Clara emerged from the shadows, her rifle lowered. "It's over," she said softly. But Cain knew it wasn't, not entirely. The name the outlaw had spoken lingered in the air like gun smoke, a reminder of battles fought and identities buried. He holstered the Colt and looked to the endless maze of stone, where the echoes of their confrontation still bounced like restless spirits. The wind carried away the last of the sound, leaving only the steady breathing of their horses and the cold hush of the canyon. Cain met Clara's gaze, and in her eyes he saw the same understanding that lived in his own, Justice had been served, but the past would always ride with them, silent as a shadow beneath the Texas sun. The moon rose swollen and red over Dead Horse Canyon, a hunter's lantern casting copper light across the broken cliffs. Elias Kane guided Flynn along a knife-edge trail, the gelding's hooves striking sparks from a stone. Wind hissed through the chasm below, carrying the scent of iron and dust. Ahead, a single figure waited at the cliff's end, outlined in the blood-colored glow. The outlaw leader stood with his revolver drawn, the black scarf at his throat snapping in the night breeze like a torn flag. Kane dismounted without a word, the gravel beneath his boots crunching in the hush. Behind him, Clara held back in the shadows, her rifle steady but silent. This was a reckoning only he could face. He stepped forward until the distance between them was a breath of empty air and a lifetime of memory. So the ghost of Shiloh finally shows his face, the leader said, voice low and rough as a whetstone. I wondered if you'd chase me to the very edge of the world. Kane kept his eyes level. You made sure of it the day you betrayed my unit. The man's grin was a white slash in the crimson light. Betrayal. I call it survival. Those boys were dead weight. I warned your colonel to move at dawn, but he trusted you. I let the Federals know where you'd be. Watched them swarm that ridge while you lined up your precious shots. Thought you died with the rest. You sold us out for a handful of silver, Kane said, the old fury steering like a storm he thought long spent. I sold us out for a future, the leader countered. And look, we both lived. Only difference is I stopped pretending I was a hero. The canyon wind keened through the rocks, carrying the weight of every word into the endless dark. Kane felt the years collapse, the thunder of Shiloh, the screams, the smell of black powder and blood. The face before him was older, roughened by sun and sin, but unmistakable. He steadied his breathing, letting the ghost settle into silence. You could have walked away tonight, Kane said, but you chose to keep killing. The outlaw shrugged, a careless motion at the edge of a precipice. Killing's all this land respects. And you, ghost, you came back to it. Don't tell me you ain't felt alive chasing me. Kane drew the Colt with the smooth inevitability of a tide, the barrel catching a glint of red moonlight. Alive isn't what I came for. For a heartbeat neither moved. The world seemed to hold its breath, coyotes fell silent, even the wind paused. Then the outlaw's revolver twitched upward, and the night exploded. One shot echoed like thunder between the canyon walls. The leader jerked as if struck by the sky itself, his revolver slipping from nerveless fingers. He staggered back a step, eyes wide in astonishment, then crumpled to the stone. The echo rolled on, fading into the infinite dark until only the rush of the canyon wind remained. Kane lowered his weapon, the old calm settling over him like the close of a long prayer. He approached the fallen men and knelt. The outlaw's eyes found his, still bright with defiance even as life drained away. You never missed, the men whispered, a hint of wonder in his failing voice. Not when it mattered, Kane replied. The leader's last breath shuddered out and was gone, carried off into the abyss below. Kane rose and looked to the horizon where the blood moon swam above the desert, casting the land in an otherworldly glow. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of the past begin to lift, though it would never vanish entirely. Behind him, Claire approached, her boots sure on the rock. It's done, she said quietly. It's done, Kane echoed. He scanned the canyon floor where the surviving henchmen huddled among the shadows, their weapons discarded, eyes wide with fear. He holstered his Colt and called down, voice carrying like a judge's decree. You'll stand before the law. Lay down your arms and you'll live to see a court. One by one they complied, the clatter of dropped guns ringing like a fragile surrender. Clara signaled to them with her rifle as Kane descended, binding the men with lengths of rawhide rope scavenged from their own gear. None dared resist. The legend of the ghost of Shiloh had done what bullets could not. When the prisoners were secured, Kane and Clara led them out of the canyon under the fading glow of the red moon. The trail back to her ranch glimmered pale in starlight, each hoofbeat a slow drum of finality. Dawn painted the far mesas with the first fragile hues of gold as they reached the homestead. Clara's mare snorted softly, as if sensing the change in the air. She dismounted and turned to him, eyes reflecting the pale morning. I'll rebuild, she said with quiet conviction. Not just the house. All of it. Matthew's dream, my life. They didn't take that. Kane studied her, seeing the strength that loss had forged. You'll make it stronger than before. And you, she asked. What will you do when the story's told? He looked toward the endless horizon where the desert met the sky, the line between them as thin as a scar. "Keep riding," he said. "There's always another trail." They parted with a clasp of hands, firm, steady, an unspoken promise that their paths had mattered to each other. Clara watched as he mounted Flint, the rising sun igniting his silhouette in gold. He tipped his hat, then turned toward the wild expanse, the figure of a man who belonged more to legend than to any town or time. As he rode away, the land held its breath once more. Some said later that when the moon turned red that night, a ghost walked the cliffs of Dead Horse Canyon, settling an old score before vanishing with the dawn. And those who tell the tale still end with the same words, spoken in hushed reverence beneath the endless Texas stars. Some said the ghost of Shiloh vanished again that night, leaving only the echo of a rifle and the boundless silence of the frontier sky.